I want you to take a second and just, try to picture a place with extreme, almost punishing geographic isolation.
Right, like real edge of the world stuff.
Exactly. We're talking about these jagged, wind-battered cliffs just thrusting violently out of the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean. They are hundreds of miles from any neighboring mainland.
The weather is volatile. The terrain is totally unforgiving.
Yeah, the isolation is absolute. And when you conjure up an image like that in your head, you probably picture a really harsh subsistence kind of lifestyle.
Oh, for sure. You imagine a small, rugged population just scraping by,
Yeah.
right? Completely cut off from the modern world.
Right, just fighting the elements to survive another winter. But what if I told you that this specific cluster of isolated rocks somehow boasts a higher accumulation of individual wealth and actually better, faster internet than most major global tech hubs?
I mean, it shatters every preconceived notion we have about economic geography.
It really does.
Historically, remote island nations are, well, they're economically marginalized. They suffer from brain drain, a total lack of resources, and just punishing import costs.
Yeah, you expect them to rely on foreign aid, not, leading the global pack in sovereign prosperity.
Well, today we have this absolutely fascinating stack of macro data crossing our desks. And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack exactly how this geographic impossibility actually became a reality.
It is quite the stack of data, too.
Yeah, it's a comprehensive 15-part macro data study titled Faroe Islands Economic and Social Evolution. It's a multi-dimensional analysis based on macro data.
And looking at the cover slide of this study, slide 1 here, it's this super minimalist academic style, just a clean, two-dimensional, flat gray silhouette map of the Faroe Islands.
Right, no flashy 3D graphics, just the raw facts.
Yeah.
Next to that map, they list the 3 core numbers that are going to frame our entire conversation today.
Yeah, and those numbers are wild. First, a skyrocketing GDP per capita that just shatters the ceilings of traditional economies. Second, a near 100% internet penetration rate.
And third, over 90,000 tons of annual fishery production, which, spoiler alert, essentially bankrolls this entire utopia.
But, as we peel back the layers of this data, we have to establish the central tension right out of the gate.
Yeah, because we are not just looking at a simple celebratory economic miracle here.
Right. It is a micro-island model of extreme resilience, sure. But this macro data reveals that they are currently hiding a ticking demographic time bomb.
Along with a highly dangerous reliance on a single environmentally vulnerable industry.
Exactly. It's a story of incredible, almost unprecedented success, but it's a success balanced entirely on a knife's edge.
So we have a wealthy utopia that might be structurally aging itself out of existence.
Yeah. And to understand how they got to this precarious peak, we need to start with the wealth paradox.
Let's do it.
Because usually when you think of immense world-beating national wealth, you think of, massive manufacturing bases like China or sprawling tech valleys in the U.S.
Or endless reserves of natural resources being mined, like in the Gulf states.
Right. So how did a tiny archipelago with literally none of those things achieve a GDP per capita of over $72,000?
Well, it requires a complete reimagining of how a nation builds foundational capital. If we slip to slide 2 and look at the macroeconomic expansion, we see a story of sustained, relentless growth.
It really defies standard economic models, doesn't it?
Completely. In developmental economics, we constantly talk about the high-income trap.
I want to pause you right there, actually, because that term gets thrown around a lot. For the listener, what exactly is the high-income trap?
So the trap occurs when a developing nation hits a wall. A country might grow rapidly at first by utilizing cheap labor or, extracting a basic natural resource.
Right, picking the low-hanging fruit.
Exactly. They get comfortable. But eventually, wages rise, the initial resource market fluctuates, and they lose their competitive edge.
Got it.
To push past that wall into a true high-income economy, a nation usually has to make a massive structural pivot. They transition into high-tech manufacturing, advanced financial services, or intellectual property.
Like South Korea pivoting to electronics or Singapore to global finance.
Precisely. If a country cannot make that leap, they stagnate. They get trapped.
Wait, hold on, though. Bypassing that high-income trap usually requires, an army of software engineers or massive banking sector.
Right.
You're telling me the Faroe Islands bypass this trap just by pulling more fish out of the water? How is that structurally different from a petrostate relying entirely on oil, which, often leads to extreme volatility rather than stable wealth?
That is the exact paradox this 2D line graph on slide 2 highlights. They didn't transition away from their primary resource, they hyper-industrialized it.
Oh, wow.
And the numbers prove the stability. The researchers used a black dashed line here to show the growth trend using constant 2015 prices.
And just to clarify, using constant 2015 prices strips away the illusion of inflation, right?
Exactly. It shows real value. And their GDP per capita didn't just spike and crash like a typical resource economy. It climbed steadily from an already impressive baseline of over $44,000.
Yeah, and the chart has this gray circle highlighting the moment it broke completely through the $50,000 barrier.
Right. Stabilizing well above $51,000 in constant terms. That proves sustained high income levels.
And when you look at the comparison line for current market prices on that same chart, it absolutely shattered the $72,000 mark.
It's staggering.
For context, if you are listening to this, that places this tiny, windswept island cluster in the absolute upper echelon of global wealth, rubbing shoulders with the richest nations on Earth.
But here is where my brain starts to glitch when reading this study.
What do you mean?
Well, foundational wealth, the historical starting point for almost any successful civilization, starts with the soil.
Oh, right. You grow food, you create an agricultural surplus, you feed a non-farming class, and you build a complex society.
Exactly. But here, when we look at slide 7 on geographic constraints, agriculture is practically an illusion.
Okay, let's unpack this because the data on their land use is almost a trick question. The study points out that a whopping 69.1% of their land is officially classified as agricultural.
Right, out of roughly 965 square kilometers total.
Yeah. And when you hear 69%, you think, oh, great, rolling fields of wheat. They have plenty of food.
Yeah.
But it's a massive statistical trap.
It really is. Slide 7 uses this nested pie chart to visualize it. You see this massive chunk for agricultural land, but the researchers note that it's almost entirely permanent pasture.
It's literally just tough grass clinging to rocky hillsides for sheep to graze on.
The international classification of agricultural land is just dangerously broad. It includes anything that can theoretically support a grazing animal.
But the capacity to grow actual human consumable crops like grains and vegetables, the caloric staples of a society, that is measured by an entirely different metric called arable land.
And this is the magnifying glass data point on the chart that absolutely blew my mind.
Me too. They actually use a little magnifying glass graphic pointing to a sliver of the pie chart so small you can't even see it otherwise.
Yeah. Right. When they filter down to the actual arable land, the deep, fertile soil that can be plowed and seeded, it is only 64 to 70 hectares in total.
For the entire nation.
Yes. To put that into perspective, 70 hectares is incredibly small.
Let's contextualize that for you listening. 70 hectares is less than a single medium-sized family farm in the American Midwest.
Wow.
You could fit the entire arable land capacity of this sovereign nation into a handful of average-sized golf courses.
That is just wild.
And when you break that down by population, it comes out to less than 0.0002 hectares per person. It is a fraction of an acre.
Which raises a profound question about national survival. With arable land accounting for less than 1/10,000th of their total area, absolute reliance on the outside world isn't a choice. It's a physical mandate.
Yeah, we often talk about global trade as a strategic economic choice, a way to optimize profits.
But for the Faroe Islands, if the supply chains stop, they don't just lose money, they lose their caloric intake.
So if you cannot farm the rock beneath your feet, you have to look outward. You have to farm the water.
Which brings us to this incredible transition in their economic model, treating the freezing North Atlantic Ocean as a boundless industrialized bank account.
Slide 6 visually maps this out perfectly with a 2D stepped area chart. It shows the historical leaps in marine production that totally transformed their society.
The total lack of green land forced a complete existential pivot to the blue ocean.
And the baseline data here shows them growing from early levels of roughly 111,000 metric tons. But the crucial part of the chart uses vertical arrows pointing to the extreme value peaks.
Right, crossing the 90,000-ton mark in key, hyper-lucrative, targeted sectors.
It's modern, industrialized wealth extraction from the sea, not just local fishing boats.
We really have to understand the mechanics of this extraction. This is not, local fishermen in wooden rowboats tossing nets over the side.
No, definitely not.
This is a highly capitalized, technologically advanced fleet operation. We are talking about massive vessels equipped with military-grade sonar to track schools of fish.
Automated processing factories right there on the ship.
Exactly. And sophisticated cold chain logistics to keep the product perfectly preserved. They have mastered the hostile marine environment the way a Silicon Valley hub masters software code.
But because they are pulling all this immense concentrated value out of the sea, and they still have that geographical mandate to import almost every single other thing they need to survive, it creates a deeply unusual economic structure.
It forces an extreme level of integration with the global economy.
Right. And slide 8 captures this trade structure with a macroeconomic statistic that is honestly hard to wrap your head around. We are looking at a line and bar chart combination here, tracking their trade volume.
And the baseline they set on this chart is 100% of their GDP.
Which is insane. For you listening, think about your personal household budget for a second. Let's say your total income for the year is $100,000. Now imagine that the amount of money you spend buying groceries and supplies combined with the money you make selling things at a garage sale is actually larger than your entire household income.
It sounds like terrible accounting, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sounds impossible. But for the Faroe Islands, their total trade volume frequently exceeds the entire gross domestic product of their islands.
It is the ultimate indicator of a microeconomy that has fully surrendered to deep globalization. The chart highlights these high-saturation gray zones, where the trade-to-GDP ratio climbs from a historical 9.6% and repeatedly breaks the 100% barrier.
Yeah, I see peaks hitting 113.3% and even 122.8%.
At 122%, you aren't just participating in trade, you are essentially a living, breathing trading post.
It's like a pressurized economic valve. A microeconomy with zero domestic crop production and a massive surplus of high-value marine protein cannot operate as a closed loop.
They absolutely must export that fish to generate the capital required to buy the grain, the heavy machinery, the electronics, and the fuel that keeps their society running.
Pumping North Atlantic resources out and global commodities back in.
But that abstract economic valve requires physical infrastructure. How do you actually move all of that?
Right, because you cannot digitize a frozen salmon and you cannot download a tractor.
Physical goods require physical movement. And in an ocean environment, that means maritime shipping.
Which leads us to slide 13, the logistics lifeline. It's an area chart tracking their container port throughput. And it uses a horizontal dashed line to show this incredibly stable meme.
They measure this in TEUs, right?
Yes. For anyone not in the shipping industry, a TEU is a 20-foot equivalent unit. Imagine those massive corrugated steel boxes you see stacked 10 stories high on cargo ships. That is a TEU.
And the data shows a relentless logistical heartbeat for the islands. The volume of shipping fluctuates in this very tight, consistent band between 31,214 and 35,753 TEUs year after year.
That flat, highly stable volume is the literal physical lifeline of the society. We mentioned the 113% trade to GDP ratio earlier. That abstract ratio is entirely dependent on those 35,000 steel boxes moving across the ocean without interruption.
Through North Atlantic storms, through winter freezes, those ships have to keep moving.
Precisely. Without the absolute clockwork reliability of that container traffic, the entire economic model collapses. It proves that their wealth isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet.
It's built on maintaining a highly functioning, physically demanding supply chain.
Okay, so we have painted this picture of a hyper-wealthy, highly integrated trading post. It sounds like an economic masterclass. But an economy is just an abstraction without the physical human beings living inside it.
Very true.
Let's transition to the human element of this study. So what does this wealth actually mean for the people living on these cliffs? Because they are rich, they are fed via massive global trade networks, and they have seemingly conquered their harsh environment.
Looking at the public health data on slide 5, at first glance, they seem practically invincible.
The public health metrics are undeniably world-leading. We are looking at a dumbbell chart here, mapped out in low-saturation gray blues, separating male and female life expectancy.
In sociological research, life expectancy is considered the ultimate lagging indicator of a successful society.
Why a lagging indicator?
Well, because you cannot fake it, and you cannot achieve it overnight. It proves that the wealth being generated isn't just sitting in offshore corporate bank accounts or, concentrated in the hands of a few fishing fleet owners.
It takes decades of sustained investment in hospitals, sanitation, nutrition to actually move the needle on life expectancy.
Exactly. High life expectancy proves the wealth is actively and fundamentally improving the biological life quality of the general population.
And the numbers here are beautiful. Overall life expectancy has steadily risen from an already very respectable 72.1 years, climbing up to a staggering 83.1 years.
And there's a fascinating gender nuance hidden in this data, too.
Yeah, the chart points specifically to the female demographic, drawing a circle around an incredible average lifespan of 85.5 years, while men are reaching 80.9 years.
They are physically outliving almost everyone else on the planet.
It is a remarkable testament to their systemic efficiency. They have effectively eliminated the traditional mortality risks associated with remote, isolated living.
Which is a big deal. When you live hundreds of miles from a mainland, a medical emergency used to be a death sentence.
But their wealth has funded excellent localized healthcare access, rapid emergency logistics, high-quality imported nutrition, and a really robust social welfare safety net.
But I have to stop you here, because this is the exact moment in the data where the narrative takes a really dark turn.
Uh-oh.
If everything is so perfect, if you are incredibly wealthy, healthy, well-fed, and living comfortably to 85 years old, why is the fertility rate falling off an absolute cliff?
And there it is. That is the ticking demographic time bomb hiding just beneath the surface of all this prosperity.
The fertility data on slide 3 is stark, and it completely disrupts the utopian narrative we've been building.
We're looking at a 2D area chart here, and it shows a massive drop in the total fertility rate. It uses an arrow to trace the plummet from a historical high of 3.5 children per woman all the way down to just 1.5.
And there's a baseline drawn right across the middle at 2.1.
Right. And if you are listening to this, that 2.1 is the magic number in global demography. That is the replacement level. You need 2.1 children per woman just to keep a population stable.
Anything below 2.1 means your population is structurally shrinking.
And the chart literally circles the exact intersection where the data dives below that line. They aren't just dipping below replacement. They are at 1.5. Why?
This is where we have to look at the social mechanisms driven by their wealth. It is a paradox of modernization. As a society becomes wealthier and more educated, fertility almost always drops.
Why so drastically here?
Well, it's several compounding factors. First, the cost of living in an economy that imports 100% of its consumer goods is astronomical. Raising a child in a hyper-developed microeconomy is incredibly expensive.
That makes sense.
Second, education. To maintain this high-tech, highly integrated economy, young people need advanced degrees. Many of them leave the islands to study in mainland Denmark or across Europe.
And once they leave and integrate into larger, more diverse mainland economies, a significant portion of them simply never return to the rocky cliffs.
Exactly. You have a structural immigration of youth compounding the drop in local birth rates.
Which leads directly to the most alarming visual in the entire data set on slide 4. The researchers call it the scissors difference in dependency ratios.
It's a dual-line graph, and it paints a grim picture.
Let's paint a mental picture of this graph for the listener because it is terrifying if you are an economist. Imagine a seesaw. This seesaw represents the balance of their society.
That's a perfect analogy.
On one side of the seesaw, you have the youth dependency ratio. This is the percentage of the population that are children who rely entirely on working adults to feed and house them.
That side of the seesaw crashes down. The data shows it plummeting from 55.4% down to 32.05%.
But at the exact same time, look at the other side of the seesaw. The elderly dependency ratio, the percentage of retired people depending on the taxes and labor of working adults, skyrockets.
It surges from 13.4% up to roughly 28.5%. The chart actually draws a circle around the shrinking gap between the two lines, pointing out the steep upward slope of the elderly curve.
The fulcrum of the seesaw is moving. The lines on the graph are crossing like a pair of open scissors snapping shut.
What you are describing is the aggressive fading of their demographic dividend.
Explain that mechanism. What is a demographic dividend?
A demographic dividend occurs when society has a massive bulge of prime working-age people and relatively few children and retirees to support. That worker-heavy structure drives massive economic surpluses and innovation.
It is the engine of rapid wealth accumulation.
But time is undefeated. As that massive generation of workers ages, and as we established, thanks to their incredible healthcare, they're living to 85 years old, the mathematical reality inverts.
So the young workers are having to push down on their side of the seesaw with 10 times the economic force just to keep the society balanced.
Exactly. You end up with the society aging incredibly rapidly. You have a shrinking pool of young, capable workers.
These are people who actually have to go out and physically manage the industrialized fishing fleets, coordinate the shipping logistics, write the code, run the hospitals, and pay the massive tax burden required to fund the welfare state.
And this shrinking group of young people is now tasked with supporting an exponentially growing base of very long-living retirees who require intense, specialized medical care.
This feels like a severe existential threat to their high welfare model, because having a GDP per capita of $72,000 is great, but money is ultimately just paper or, digital digits in a bank. Wealth alone cannot physically bathe an 85-year-old citizen. Wealth cannot physically haul a fishing net in the freezing ocean. A shrinking physical workforce creates a structural fragility that capital can only patch over for so long.
Which is why we see them making a massive society-wide pivot in the next section of the data. If a nation realizes it is structurally running out of young human hands, it has exactly one viable countermeasure to survive.
Automation.
Yes, it must lean heavily into extreme technological modernization and efficiency. If you lack physical labor, you must replace it with automation.
Which brings us perfectly into slide 9, exploring how the Faroe Islands have wired their society. The data on their infrastructure is, frankly, absolute perfection.
It's a very simple infographic. Two 2D progress bars, both completely full.
One for urban populations, one for rural. We are looking at a 100% electricity access rate. And let me clarify this. Not just for the urban centers or the main ports, 100% access for the rural populations as well.
Every single person living on every single jagged, remote, storm-battered rock in this archipelago is plugged seamlessly into the grid.
As an engineering feat, you truly have to marvel at the mechanics of achieving that. How do you even do that?
Well, it requires phenomenal, relentless capital investment. To maintain 100% stable power coverage across an isolated archipelago subject to extreme, violent North Atlantic weather systems, it means laying incredibly expensive subsea cables.
Right.
It means building redundant microgrids that can survive hurricane-force winds. The cost per capita to build that infrastructure is astronomical, but their fishing wealth allowed them to front that cost.
And once they were physically plugged into the power grid, they got online incredibly fast. Slide 10 maps out this beautiful digital S-curve tracking their internet penetration.
They went from literally 0% access to a stabilized, near-universal 97.5% usage rate in essentially a single generation. The chart uses brackets to highlight that rapid vertical growth phase.
And it wasn't just slow dial-up connections. The data shows fixed broadband subscriptions surging from basically 0.11 per 100 people, exploding up to 36.3 per 100 people.
They went from disconnected to having high-speed fiber essentially wired into every cliffside home. They are a fully 100% connected society.
This represents a complete structural transition. By achieving near-universal digital penetration, they have allowed their small, shrinking, physically isolated population to punch massively above its weight on the global stage.
It's the ultimate efficiency multiplier. A single worker in the Faroe Islands can now manage global logistics, monitor automated processing plants, participate in international finance, and optimize their domestic fishing quotas in real time.
Technology is masking their demographic decline.
Precise.
But there's a massive catch here. You have this highly automated, hyper-connected society that relies on algorithms and machines to make up for a lack of young workers. But automation requires massive, uninterrupted power.
It does.
And when you look at their geography, literally surrounded by endless, howling wind and rushing ocean currents, you would naturally assume they have infinite, 100% green energy, right? You'd think they're running on pure nature.
But they aren't.
No. Slide 11 shows the energy struggle is intensely real, and the data reflects a deep vulnerability in their system.
We are looking at a bar chart tracking renewable electricity output as a percentage of total generation. And it uses a dashed line connecting the peaks and valleys to highlight these incredibly violent fluctuations.
It is not a smooth line at all. It bounces wildly year over year, dropping as low as 28.2% and spiking up to 60.09%. Why is it so erratic? With all that wind and water, why can't they just lock in at 100% renewable?
Because the mechanism of green energy on a remote island is entirely at the mercy of climatic conditions. Hydroelectric and wind power are deeply weather dependent. If they experience a relatively dry year with less rainfall filling their high-altitude reservoirs, the hydroelectric output plummets. If the North Atlantic wind patterns shift or drop in intensity, the turbines stop spinning.
The islands clearly want a green transition. The infrastructure exists to capture over 60% of their needs from nature, but nature refuses to be predictable.
And this is the critical vulnerability. When the wind stops blowing and the rain stops falling, the server farms keeping their economy connected still need power. The automated fish processing plants still need to run freezing units.
So they have to rely on massive imports of fossil fuels, likely diesel, to fill those massive gaps in the grid, which leads us directly to slide 12, the carbon footprint of this incredible wealth.
And we need to look at the carbon data carefully. On a sheer global scale, their total CO2 emissions are absolutely microscopic.
We're talking about total emissions creeping up from 0.00009 million tons to 0.00021 million tons, and their per capita carbon output is hovering between zero point zero 0.03 and 0.041 tons.
To put that in perspective, their entire national carbon footprint is roughly equivalent to a few busy neighborhoods in Texas. It's tiny.
But the chart has this thin arrow pointing out the slope of the line. It's a flat but persistent upward slope. Why does that matter if the total amount is still a drop in the ocean?
Because it reveals a structural flaw in their growth model. That upward slope indicates that every inch of their economic expansion, adding larger, more industrialized fishing vessels, increasing their container imports to feed their wealthy lifestyle, building out the tech grid, it all comes at a tangible, unavoidable carbon cost.
Even microeconomies are not immune to the pressures of global emission controls.
Exactly. As the global community moves aggressively towards stricter carbon accounting and international carbon taxes, even remote islands will be forced to reconcile their economic growth with their environmental impact.
Yes, the Faroe Islands are incredibly wealthy. They can easily afford to buy the diesel fuel they need today.
But that very act of importing fuel increases their systemic vulnerability to future global carbon pricing. If the cost of emitting carbon skyrockets globally, their profit margins on exporting fish and importing goods will shrink drastically.
It is all interconnected. The geography dictates the industry creates the wealth changes the demographics force automation, and the automation demands volatile energy.
Which perfectly sets us up to look at the grand ledger on slide 14.
Yes, we have pulled all these threads together. We have the data on the massive wealth, the harsh geographical limits, the aging population, and the environmental constraints. It is time to synthesize this into a classic structural matrix, a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
This is the most effective way to synthesize multidimensional macro data into a clear, strategic picture of a nation's future. It's plotted on this really clean 2D cross matrix.
Okay, I want us to really debate this matrix. Let's start with strengths. That is undeniably their high wealth and extreme welfare state. The chart notes a constant GDP of over $50,000. They have the capital to solve problems.
Absolutely.
But then we hit the weaknesses quadrant, the extreme geographic limits, the fact that an entire sovereign nation shares roughly 60 hectares of arable land. They can never, ever be self-sustaining in food production.
That is a permanent weakness. Geography cannot be negotiated with. However, their opportunities remain tethered to their mastery of the sea.
The nearly 90,000 tons of fishery yield.
Yes, it proves they still possess the technological capacity to maximize their oceanic endowment. They haven't tapped out the ocean yet.
But the threats, that is the looming shadow over this entire study. The systemic fragility of an old-age dependency ratio rapidly approaching 30%, combined with a rigid single-industry structure.
It's a dangerous combination.
So I have to challenge you on this. We see countries facing aging populations all over the world, but most of them aren't this rich. Can money solve aging? Does all that GDP strength negate the demographic threat? Can't they just buy their way out of this?
That is the illusion of capital. Wealth buys time, but it does not buy immunity. Wealth allows you to build the most advanced healthcare systems in the world, which they have done.
It allows you to import foreign labor to temporarily fill the gaps in the workforce, which they are attempting.
And it allows you to automate physical systems. But wealth does not spontaneously generate a diversified, deeply rooted young workforce.
And the single industry reliance is the multiplier on that threat.
Precisely. A single industry economy is permanently vulnerable to external shocks. Let's run a hypothetical scenario based on their data. What happens if fish stocks migrate further north due to warming ocean temperatures caused by climate change?
Or what happens if a new global pandemic or geopolitical conflict permanently disrupts the shipping routes they rely on for 113% of their GDP trade?
If you have a vibrant, growing, diversified population, you can pivot. You can invent a new industry. But if you have a shrinking, rapidly aging population when a massive external shock hits your single pillar of wealth, the high-income trap springs shut violently. You simply do not have the human capital to rebuild.
It's a terrifying thought. You are wealthy right up until the exact moment you aren't, and then you have no young people to help you survive the fall.
Yeah.
And this tension leads directly to the final academic conclusion of the study on slide 15, which visualizes this entire deep dive perfectly. The authors map out the nation's reality in three core pillars.
It's a very stark, text-heavy slide with just 3 numbered circles. Let's walk through them.
Pillar 1, the wealth leap. They undeniably did it. They conquered the rock, they industrialized the sea, and they won the global economic game.
Pillar 2, the population had it all. The plunging fertility rate and the scissor graph of a rapidly aging society threatening to collapse the welfare state.
And pillar 3, resource unipolarity. The absolute unyielding reliance on a single sector, the sea, to fund everything else.
The ultimate academic verdict here is profound, and it applies far beyond the North Atlantic.
Oh, so?
The Faroe Islands stand as the ultimate proof that micro-remote economies do not have to be poor. They are not destined for marginalization. They can achieve top-tier global prosperity through deep globalization and absolute technological mastery of their specific natural endowment.
And there is a big but here.
But their future survival depends entirely on a massive structural policy pivot over the next decade. They cannot simply rely on the momentum of their fishing wealth.
They must aggressively optimize their population structure, perhaps through radically family-friendly economic policies to boost that 1.5 fertility rate, or highly targeted, long-term immigration strategies to bring young workers to the islands.
And crucially, they absolutely must find a second economic pillar beyond the sea. They need a backup plan for when the ocean changes.
It is a phenomenal balancing act, and it leaves you, the listener, with a lingering, deeply provocative thought to ponder. Think about the trajectory we just mapped out.
It's a wild ride.
If a society has completely conquered its hostile geography, if it has achieved maximum wealth for its citizens, and if it has wired every single person to the global internet, but it is slowly, structurally aging out of physical existence, how do we actually measure the ultimate success of a nation?
Is success defined by GDP or by generational continuity?
Exactly. Does the Faroe Islands' future lie in using their world-class internet infrastructure to essentially become digital nomads in their own home? Will they have to replace the physical maritime labor they no longer have with remote global tech work? Can a nation code its way out of a demographic collapse?
It is the defining economic and sociological question for their next century. And frankly, it is a question many developed nations will soon have to answer for themselves.
Which is exactly why we dive into these macro data studies. Because this isn't just a Faroe Islands problem. If you are listening to this in the United States, in Japan, or in Western Europe, you are looking at early warning signs of your own future.
The Faroe Islands are just experiencing it in a hyper-accelerated, isolated petri dish.
Take a look around your own local economy, your own community, and ask yourself how many of these invisible macro trends, from aging demographics to single industry reliance, are shaping your future right now. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the data. Until next time, keep questioning the numbers and keep digging.